I love that we did Joy to the World because it talks about exactly what I want to talk about in this particular sermon, which is the idea that in the world, there are all kinds of things that just don't seem to go together. You know, like the good and evil fight that's always happening. There's always like this bad thing that goes with this good thing, and Christmas is one of those stories and one of those times that seems to sort of set it to right. Or at least that's what we hope for. That's the hope of Christmas. You know, there are just some things in this world that do not go together. Am I on? Yeah. Oh, okay. It just sounds quiet. That's all. Okay. There are some things in this world that just don't go together. So, funny story for you. When Paul and I we'd only been married a few years, Paul decided, bless his heart, to make me a birthday dinner. Yeah, I know, it's so sweet. And he was going to make my favorite food. My favorite food at the time was lasagna. Anybody else like lasagna? Or Italian food in general? Yeah, okay. It's awesome. And so lasagna is, is decadent and it's carby. It's totally bad for you. I'm going to have it on my birthday, right? He wants to make it this year, extra special. Oh, honey, thank you so much. So off I go. I was in seminary at the time. So off I go to seminary, and I came back that night just like so excited to have lasagna for dinner. But what you must know about Paul is that especially when we were younger and first married and all that stuff, he was like Mr. Health, right? The guy didn't even like sweets, just didn't even like sugar. He craved vegetables. Crazy, I know. I married him in spite of it. Well, he was always trying to make anything that he cooked extra healthy. So he just added a couple of things to the lasagna just to make it a little healthier. He added, y'all, broccoli to my lasagna. Oh, it gets worse. He also wanted to make sure there was extra protein in there, so but he didn't want any of the extra animal fat, so he put in kidney beans. I know. There are some things that just do not belong together, okay? Kidney beans and broccoli in lasagna, that just does not go. That does not go. Bless his heart. Sometimes I feel that way as we're approaching Christmas, right? Christmas is so good. It's so good overall. I mean, you get all the family warm fuzzies and the Christmas carols, and, well, can we really deny it? The gift giving is fun. It's fun, right? And you get to open up all your presents and stuff. Is so good. But there's also all this other stuff that comes along with Christmas. Do you find yourself getting all stressed out at Christmas time? Don't you dare deny that. I know it's true because there's this mixed bag that comes with Christmas. There's all the good stuff, but then there's all this other stuff that comes with Christmas. I mean, Christmas can be kind of hard, actually. There's the stressful stuff, which we'll get to in a second, but then there's this whole other element, like if you've ever had anything emotionally difficult happen to you during the Christmas season, it like sticks with you for every Christmas season afterwards. You know, if you've had a loved one die at Christmas time, right? Or if you go through a transition, whether it be like work or personal or whatever, around that time of year, that's always comes up, because then when you are observing Christmas again, then those same feelings come with it. It's like one of those psychological responses. I don't know. Then there's also all the stresses that come with Christmas. There's always extra stuff to do. I'm a list maker. Anybody else a list maker? Oh my gosh, the lists are like never ending in December. Never ending at Christmas, because you got all your regular lists, like you got to do all the grocery shopping and the chores and the whatever, but even those lists become bigger because you got to get all the special foods and what so-and-so likes, and you got to cook it this way, and then you're bringing stuff to parties or making a party yourself. I don't know. The lists get huge. And then there's the gift-giving list. You don't leave anybody off the list. Have you ever left somebody significant off of a Christmas list? And then you do that mad dash at the end to try and get it. Stressful. And then here's the other list that I don't think we ever talk about, but really exists, is the, well, I probably should list around Christmas time. For me, giving Christmas cards is always on that list. Yeah, I've never sent out Christmas cards in my life. Never. But every single year, it's on this like hidden list I have in my mind of, oh, I should probably do that. And then I feel guilty for doing something I've never done before. Do you know what I mean? That's Christmas. That's like the other side of Christmas. There's this whole other level of stuff that comes with it. Guys, what if we could celebrate Christmas without all that stuff? I give you Christmas in July. Woo! So excited. Okay, so Christmas in July is really just all about, hello, Christ is born. Christ is amongst us. And what does that mean for the world? I focused on the Isaiah passage this week, and Isaiah in general, actually, in my own devotional time leading up to this Sunday, because the Isaiah passage really highlights the idea that there are things in the world that are just total dichotomies of one another. They're total opposite sides of the coin, but it always seems that you can't have one without the other. So let's talk a little bit about the history of this in Isaiah and the passage and stuff. Okay, so Isaiah is the prophecy that there will be a leader that comes that will be the one of God and who will bring this hopeful, amazing, wonderful, miracle change into the world. And a lot of people started to say, that's Jesus. And so we look back on this passage as if it is Jesus. Now, doing Christmas in July, I really like to look at the validity of like when Jesus was actually born and how this all came about. So let's talk about for a second, was Jesus actually born like in the winter around the solstice? You're saying no? Oh, good. I'm not going to pop as many bubbles as I thought. That's awesome. No, actually, he probably wasn't born at Christmas time. So there are some arguments that tell us why he probably was not born during the winter time. So the first one has to do with the census. So, Mary and Joseph had to travel to Bethlehem so they could be counted in the census. Well, traveling during the winter time, that's just silliness. Even from a Roman perspective, because it was dangerous, it was more treacherous, people could die along the way, and so it was actually, it kind of went against the government's purposes and having everybody accounted. I mean, if they did it during the wintertime, they'd have less people to count by the time they actually got where they were going. So that probably didn't happen in the wintertime. It probably happened like in the summer or in the fall. The other thing that tells us that Jesus probably wasn't born during, like, kind of by the winter solstice, was that the shepherds and the flocks. That whole thing where the angels appear to the shepherds and they were out in the field watching their flocks by night. Dude, winter is cold. Cold even in the desert, right? We know this. When the sun goes down in the wintertime, so does the temperature. And so flocks, they're not out on the hillsides around the winter solstice. In fact, around Jerusalem and everything, that's their rainy season. So why would a shepherd keep his flocks out in the rain and in the cold? No. They would have sought shelter at that point. So actually, the time when a shepherd would be out in the hills with his flock would be more like summer or fall. So it makes more sense that might be when Jesus was born. So when was he born? Now, we can actually maybe figure this out because of John. You remember Elizabeth gets pregnant with John before Mary gets pregnant with Jesus. Okay, and there's about 6 months difference there. So if we can track the story of John, then we can figure out maybe when Jesus was born. John is a little easier, remember, because his father was serving as a priest in the temple. And, that's when he didn't believe that Elizabeth could get pregnant, and he's struck mute until the baby is born. Well, think of serving in the temple sort of like Congress. They got like sessions of Congress, without all the filibusters and that sort of thing. Okay, so if you track when Zechariah would have been serving in the temple, it probably would have been in June. I don't know, there's some sources that pinpoint it as closely down as like middle of June. All right, so middle of June, and then Zechariah goes home and Elizabeth gets pregnant, and so 9 months after that, you could guess maybe late March that John would have been born, and then Jesus was 6 months after that. So we're looking at like September. Isn't that kind of cool? Seriously, that's fascinating. That's fascinating. So you can actually pinpoint the time of year when Jesus might have been born. But you know what? It kind of doesn't matter. It kind of doesn't matter. And I think that's what the early church decided, is that the exact date is not the most important thing. Actually, the most important thing is remembering the reason that we're celebrating it and the whole meaning of Christ's birth into the world. So they actually decided to celebrate Christmas near the winter solstice because it made more sense to people of the time. It made Christ's story and the birth more relatable because paganism already had all kinds of holidays around the winter solstice. So if Christians began to tell their story alongside that, it was like people could relate to it. They could understand, oh, this is another one of those life-changing sort of pattern your life around it kind of stories. And then there's also, I read this one later, this one's new to me, the whole light, Jesus is the light of the world coming into the world. Light gets really dark around the winter solstice. And then from then on, the light gets longer and longer every day. So that kind of speaks to it too, right? If Christ is born and then the light keeps coming into the world, that makes a lot of sense as well. All right. So that kind of gives us some insight of when Christ was born. And well, we can celebrate Christmas any time of the year. When you look into the book of Isaiah, this is like the core, the hub of why Christ was born. And really the words that we hold on to, I think, that we need to hold in our mind as we're talking about it, is miracle and hope. So the book of Isaiah is sort of divided into 3 parts, and actually they're written in different times and even by different prophets. So the first part, which we're in today, is first Isaiah. Then there's second Isaiah. I'll give you a guess on what the last part's called. Not a trick question. Third Isaiah. All right. So first Isaiah is written through a period of time that spans 4 different kings in Jerusalem. And that writer, that prophet, is actually the guy that the book is named for, so you can think of him as Isaiah. All right. So Isaiah is writing about the importance of leadership in the kingdom of God. And Isaiah, this first writer, really believes strongly in the fact that God will come and reside in Jerusalem. And so it talks about, the things that are going wrong at the time, the things that, people are not respecting the God who has created them and brought them all of these gifts and sees them through life, and talks about how all of that must be put to rights. So the whole city kind of has to be cleansed. Now, the writer of Isaiah also insists that God will actually live in this city, so it makes a lot more sense that Jerusalem would have to be cleansed, because how could God live in a city that is so degraded and demoralized? So it's got to be all cleaned out. But the way that it's written, and this is what struck me as I was reading through the first chapters of Isaiah, the way that it's written is a little bit different. I mean, it goes into all that stuff of like, oh, there's so much sin. There's so much going against God. You people just don't understand. There's all that. But it's written in a voice that says, but God is coming. Hope is here. And even though all this bad stuff is happening, there is absolutely no reason that we could ever think that God can't set it to right. In fact, you can just know that God will come and all will be made right again. That's Isaiah. This is a God that's born in the strangest of ways, right? You've heard this sermon around Christmas time. Jesus is born in one of the strangest ways. The king is born as a child, which is not valuable in his time. He's born to out of wedlock. That's just scandalous. He's born to a virgin, so clearly doesn't even respect or abide by the laws of nature. He's born as an enemy of the Roman state. and is raised initially as an unwanted immigrant. This is a God who understands that life is not comfortable and that pain is real. This is a God who calls us to still believe in hope, even in a world that is so fraught with pain, with violence, with death. You know, while I was on vacation, I was on airplane mode for 18 days. You know what I mean? Airplane mode? Like you turn your phone to like you're on an airplane. So that means no text messages, no Facebook, none of that. I had withdrawals for the first few days. And then I started to get used to it, right? And then Margaret would steal my phone and play her little games, and I wouldn't even notice. But we got back, and I turned it back on, and I had missed 18 days of the world. And I'd missed a lot. A lot happened in this last month. So I came back to Philando Castile shot in Minnesota. I came back to Alton Sterling shot in Baton Rouge. I came back to the police officers shot in Dallas. But, you know, there was so much more than that as well. Like, I found out that a childhood friend had died. I found out that another friend had lost her pregnancy. All this stuff. And I felt like I missed it. Wow, I missed a lot. But did I really? Did I really miss all of that? Well, not really, because you don't really miss the pain that you didn't have to go through, right? No, because I also realized that it's a part of this ongoing story. The things that are happening in our world all the time that have happened from way back since the beginning of time, and sadly that will continue to happen in the world ahead. And yet, so this passage in Isaiah goes on, and it talks about how Christ's coming, this prophet coming into the world, will change all of that. And that all these crazy things that we thought were never possible will actually be possible. It talks about the wolf lying down with the lamb, right? And a little child being able to put its hand inside the cobra's den. Those are things that just don't go together. That just cannot possibly happen. And I started to realize, but you know what? The world is always embracing and making possible these hope-filled things that we never thought could happen. I've seen so many posts on Facebook this week as the Democratic National Convention is going on. Whether you are supporting, if you're a Democrat, if you're a Republican, if you're anything else, I can't tell you how many times I've seen the phrase, I'm not a Hillary supporter, but this week was a big moment for our country. We nominated a female candidate for a presidential election from a national party. And that's a big moment. There are big moments like this that are happening to us all the time. We celebrate Christmas in July lest we forget. Lest we forget that someday there will be a world in which you can travel abroad without fear of ISIS. Someday there will be a world where a Republican and a Democrat will say nice things to each other or about each other without a qualifying asterisk underneath it. Someday there will be a world where we don't feel the need to respond all lives matter because there was never a reason that we needed to say Black lives matter in the first place, or Native American lives matter, or female lives matter, or whatever. Someday there will be a world in which peace and hope and love are a reality because Christ is born. Merry Christmas.